In 1960, less than 5% of American children were obese. Today, that number has quadrupled. Autism, once diagnosed in 1 out of every 10,000 children, is now found in 1 out of every 31 children. And for the first time in modern history, our children are expected to live shorter lives than their parents. This isn't a mere health crisis, it's a moral reckoning. Earlier this month, the Department of Health and Human Services released a 69-page report under the direction of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., diagnosing the American child health epidemic as a symptom of environmental toxins, poor nutrition, chronic stress, and what he calls overmedicalization, and said that America is literally the sickest country in the world, close quote. Critics from legacy media were quick to dismiss the report, some for its skepticism toward the pharmaceutical industry, others for its emphasis on personal responsibility over systematic reform. But even the loudest detractors had to confront the numbers: skyrocketing rates of cancer, obesity, ADHD, and mental illness in a nation that spends more on healthcare than any other civilization in history. So here's the truth. We are not simply failing to treat disease. We are cultivating it. And the national debt that we should be most concerned with isn't fiscal, but moral. A debt owed to our children for the bodies that we've poisoned, the minds that we've dulled, and the institutions we've trusted to care for them. This episode is brought to you by our premier sponsors, Armored Republic and Reese Fund, as well as our Patreon members and our generous donors. You can join our Patreon by going to patreon.com/Right Response Ministries, or you can make a donation by going to rightresponseministries.com/donate. So what now? What does Christian responsibility look like in the face of a national health crisis, one that implicates not just bureaucrats and corporations, but the way we shop, eat, parent, and medicate? Let's dive in. All right. Here we are. Michael, you have outlined this episode for us on the health crisis that's currently underway in our nation, particularly as it applies to our children. So do you want to go ahead and lead us off? I know that you've got a lot of research and stats that you want to get to, and I think that this is one that the listeners will be very eager to hear.
Yeah, so the goal with this episode, we have talked about health crisis in America and how we're fat and lazy and unhealthy before. So this episode is a little bit different in that just last week, RFK and the HHS released what they called their diagnosis of the state of health, particularly among children in America. And then he said within 3 months, they'll be releasing their prescription. So this is how bad things are. And then they're working on plans and proposals and things like that they can put forward to help fix the problem. But last week was just the 69 pages of this is the situation. And spoiler alert, we're fat and sick as a nation.
I've been to Walmart recently. I know.
Yeah. What's that? Oh, yeah. Exactly. So the other thing that I'm hoping will be a little bit different with this episode is I took the time to break out, what would it look like for an average budget to make this change or that change, right? So if some of these numbers alarm you, or if you and your family have been thinking about trying to make some changes, I tried to give some real practical, like, this is how much this costs, this is how much this kind of food costs, this is what it would look like to make this change. And so beyond just speaking in the abstract, trying to help give the listener a real practical idea of what some of these changes might require for your family, for your budget, for your time, things like that. So. Right. We do want to go ahead and jump into a little bit of the background and the report. So, Nate, if you've got those slides that I sent you, the ones that I formatted for you, I'm just going to kind of go through those one at a time here at the beginning. Okay, so this is according to the report from the HHS and RFK Jr. The causes of illness in the U.S. Number one, poor diet driven primarily by ultra-processed foods. And I think that this is the one where almost nobody can argue with this. He had a great one-liner. Someone was interviewing him, and they said, how are you so sure that we're the sickest country in the world or something like that? He said, just look at us. Look at our children. And it's like... Yeah. Can't argue with that.
Let me expand on ultra-processed foods for
Please
just a
do.
second. That's if you think of your nutrition label, obviously there's individual ingredients that go into there, but I really can't think of a good nutritional food that's going to have a super long list. So of course, maybe you've got bread, you've got a couple things in there, but when we say ultra-processed, what we literally mean is just there's more and more and more things being added to it. A good example is things that are added to help preserve shelf stability. This means you can make more of it and it lasts longer. But that's more ingredients to add. They're not healthy towards you. It expands that nutrition label. And so when you're thinking what's ultra processed, for sure there's ingredients, which we're going to get into, but also it's just how much stuff is in there, trying to make sure it lasts as long as possible. It has the most calories. It's the most literally even stimulating. That's what you're thinking of.
Yeah. And that's usually like an 8. If it ends in an 8, ATE, glycerate, or things like that, that's usually there.
Can you pronounce it? Does it make sense? Like wheat, sugar, coconut oil. Okay, that sounds good. Those things, you start getting into, dyes like Red 6. What does that even mean? What is that even from?
Red 6.
Artificial flavors, and won't even expand on what that is. That's where the caution bells need to go off.
Funny story about that. We went camping once and we left our food out, which we always put the food away in the Northwest. But one night, we'd never had problems with bears. We'd been to this campsite many times. One night, we were up late and we were just like, we're literally going to be waking up in 4 hours when the sun comes up. We're just going to leave it out. Mm-hmm. So in those 4 hours while we were sleeping, bears did come through our campsite and they got into all the food. And the only thing they left completely untouched?
The grass-fed beef?
The bag of marshmallows. They're like, that is not even worthy to be put in our mouths. So
right. It's true.
Yeah. Okay. So that was number one. Number two is cumulative exposure to chemicals like food additives and pesticides. And I think we've mentioned this before. It bears repeating again. This was really startling to me. Pests are obviously a problem when it comes to producing food and farming, right? Mm-hmm. You've got bugs and things like that come and eat the crops. And so companies have developed chemical products to kill those bugs. Well, pre-60s, what they would do is they would spray this pesticide on the crop just as it was coming up, right? Kill all the bugs around it. And then, even though it was there and it was in the soil, which isn't great, the rain would wash it off of all of the products, all of the vegetables that were growing, and the wheat and the grain that was growing. Well, they discovered, and Wes, so much of this comes down to what you said a moment ago, the chemicals that they put in our food are to preserve it so it can sit on the shelf longer. What the farmers discovered was that if they sprayed this product on their grain, for instance, it would keep it from rotting. And so they could harvest it, and they didn't have to be so quick about getting it to the mill or grinding it right away into flour, which is easier to preserve. And so the policy began to be, and now is very common, that they now spray pesticides all through the process and right before harvest. And then then that keeps it from rotting or kind of going bad while it sits out in the fields waiting to be bundled up, and it never gets rinsed off. And then that goes and gets ground into the flour or the corn or whatever it is, and we're eating these foods now that have never been rinsed off of all of these chemicals, right? And this is actually now standard in many, many farming practices around the country. So
that reason they won't rot is because bacteria literally won't grow on them.
That's right.
And I know with corn is the big one. It desiccates it when you do it at the very end.
Yep.
And so the big one you're thinking about is glyphosate. There's a great book called Toxic Legacy. Toxic Legacy is the book if you want to read more about this. There's been tons of lawsuits, tons of people saying like, hey, this stuff is super toxic. It's destructive. Like you said, Michael, you're not just applying it at the beginning as a pre-emergent, but through T6, T8. These are the different stages of corn growth. And it's a huge problem because like high fructose corn syrup, well, it's corn syrup. It's deriving some of that sweetness from corn. And this is corn that has been doused in these pesticides and glyphosate. And then it's pumped right into your kids' cereal, pumped right into your sugary drinks because it's a very cheap way of getting sugar. And so pesticides, read that book, look at other books. That's why organic matters so much, is because organic food is food that at least hypothetically, a lot of times sometimes there's cross-pollination or it's planted in the same ground as non-organic crops. But generally speaking, organic food will be food that's grown without the use of these toxic pesticides.
And the glyphosate in particular, now we don't trust the World Health Organization as far as we can throw them, right? Especially after COVID. But even they have come out and said internationally that glyphosate is terrible for you.
And this is Roundup. Like if you go to the store and buy Roundup,
what you use
this is this terrible stuff. And people put it in their lawns.
Yeah.
So then their kids go out, they walk all through it. Your lawn looks great, sure. It's on their feet. They track it inside. They touch their hands. And they're literally ingesting it. This stuff is tied to cancer. This stuff is tied to neurodevelopmental disorders, all sorts of terrible things. And so think glyphosate, think Roundup, think all of these different categories when you think of these toxic pesticides that are really, really, really negatively impacting our children especially.
Yeah. The third one was overmedicalization. I'm sorry, that's number 4. Third one is lack of physical activity and chronic stress.
Yeah.
And then fourth one, overmedicalization, which we're going to get to in a moment. Not even just the vaccines. We prescribe a lot of medications here. Not the most of any country in the world, but we overprescribe a lot of medications here.
Yes.
Especially what we're going to get into, the antipsychotics and the antidepressants, right? That is really, really terrible what's going on. Okay, Nate, let's go to the next slide. So this is just some stats about our health as compared to the past. Currently, this is in the report, over 40% of American children now have at least one chronic health condition, such as asthma, allergies, obesity, autoimmune diseases, or behavioral disorders. 40%, almost half of American kids have some sort of chronic health condition that's going to make it difficult for them to grow healthy in the way that they should. In the 1960s, I think we said this in the cold open, less than 5% of children were obese. Now we're over 20%. Autism diagnoses have increased from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 30 today. And in California, RFK said where they actually track this better than any other state, they're reporting 1 in 20, which is absolutely crazy. And then childhood cancer rates have increased by nearly 50% since 1975.
With the cancer too, we've talked about this. Cancer is it's a genetic malfunction that stops suppressing uncontrolled growth. So this is P53, and that's typically brought on by oxidative stress. And so when you hear children are getting cancer more, it's very tempting to be like, well, it's the sugar, or well, it's the sunshine, or well, it's the sunscreen. Like there's a whole host of things you could attribute it to, but really what all of them are doing, regardless if it's a specific ingredient or substance or whatever it is they're inducing oxidative stress that's causing DNA damage that's leading to the inability of the body to suppress the tumors when they start to grow.
Right.
So that's what you got to be thinking about. It's not a single ingredient or a thing we're doing. An entire host of inputs are destroying kids' DNA as they're growing, and then the DNA is unable to produce everything that helps suppress cancer before it grows and becomes a problem.
Wes, you tell me if you agree with this. We're probably not going to find a single bullet, this is the thing that's causing cancer. Because like you say, a lot of the cell irregularities that happen that leads to tumors, if your body is healthy, it can actually fight against that.
Exactly.
It's when you subdue or suppress the immune system so far and are introducing things into the body that cause it to replicate its cells incorrectly that we're going to see a really steep increase in the rise of cancer rates.
Yep. And chance is part of it. There are people that smoke a pack of
That's
cigarettes
true.
a day
Yep.
and they live into their 90s. Like
Yep.
practically speaking, and it's not just like, well, he was resilient or ate his broccoli. Like practically speaking, chances play a part of it. But you can increase your chances of getting it by your lifestyle or decrease in the same way by reducing your intake.
Yep.
Again, not of a single ingredient or factor, but a host of different things.
Because these ingredients, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is they make it more likely that your cell will mutate.
Exactly.
Right?
They
There's not a
introduce that
guarantee
oxidative
that
stress
it will. Yes.
by those reactive oxygen species
Yes.
that are damaging.
Yeah. Okay, good. Let's go back to the slide. Let's go to the next one, actually. Sorry, Nate. So continuing on the stats about our health currently. So some of the mental health issues here. Teenage depression nearly doubled from 2009 to 19. That's a little bit older. Part of it, I don't know. Anyway, between 1987 and 2014, antidepressant prescriptions for children, this is the one, have increased by not 140, not 4%, 1,400%.
14x.
Yeah, 14. Yeah. And then ADHD prescriptions through 2016 are up 250%.
Yeah, part of this, I feel like this to me seems multifaceted.
Yep.
Part of it would have to do with nutrition and food and pesticides and all those different things. as it affects someone's biology. But then I think there's also the mental capacity of screens. I think is a big factor. Social media, too much television, just constantly connected to a screen, and looking at the lives of others on the other side of the planet, and feeling the sense of longing, and why isn't my life better? Comparing yourself to everybody else, and just not going outside, not getting sunlight, not being active, not having in person blood and flesh relationships. And then I feel like at least a third factor would have to do with the lack of parental discipline and training and admonishment. So if you have absent parents, they may be present, but still they're largely absent. If you compare that to generations past, by the mere fact of sending kids to state school, and then some kind of after school program, because even when they finish school, you still need to buy yourself a couple more hours, because both mom and dad are working and not going to be home until 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, or something like that. So you're spending very little time with the parents. The parents are not actually responsible, not taking up that responsibility to teach and train their children and discipline when necessary. And then you have all the dietary problems when in different toxic sludge that they're eating, and then they're also being raised by the television and social media. And you have kids that are 10 years old with an iPhone and complete access with zero restrictions to the internet. And that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yep, absolutely.
On that screen time piece too, I would say it's the dopamine system in the brain. It's what drives us towards reward behaviors. So this would be things like sex within marriage, obviously, but also food, even work. So payoff when there's accomplishment. For men, dopamine is tied to testosterone. So men that have dopamine from winning then also have higher testosterone. So it's a reward system that's God made and is intended to drive us towards beneficial behaviors. But the way screens shortcut that is you get smaller. So it's much smaller than, for example, winning an event that you trained really hard for, or the payoff of having an absolutely delicious meal. It's a smaller payoff, but it can be accessed at any time. Anytime you open a mobile game, for instance, there's tons of sounds and lights and colors and rewards and everything that are literally meant to hijack and give you the rewards, but it's at your fingertips. So instead of I have to labor for X, Y, and Z amount of time to get this payoff, well, you could literally do it again and again daily. And you have kids that just, it's short-circuited. They have no concept of putting in a lot of work and a long time for a bigger payoff, because they have literally been offered and handed something that's hyper-stimulating, hyper-rewarding, but it dulls them. The little doses here and there absolutely dull them to the way it's actually supposed to function around much more major life events.
Yes. Okay, let's talk about some of the cost here of being sick. So Nate, this is going to be just the very next slide. So these numbers are really crazy. The U.S., so this is not the government. This is, I believe, the government and citizens. The U.S. spends $4.5 trillion on healthcare per year, and yet we're literally the sickest country in the world. I mean, you think about $4.5 trillion between the consumers, the patients, the government, all the programs. $4.5 trillion a year spent on quote unquote healthcare. To get us, you would think if we're spending that much money on it, we would be living to be like 180 years old or something like that. But no, we're literally the sickest country in the world. Diabetes, 1 in 3 kids is now diabetic or pre-diabetic. Diabetes is now costing the U.S. $1 trillion per year. So that 1 trillion.
I think that's really bad in the Black community too. A lot of diabetes.
It is very high. Yep. When JFK was president, this was from a quote from RFK. So when he said my uncle was president, the U.S. government spent $0. So of the U.S. government's budget, $0 were for its citizens' chronic health diseases. It doesn't mean there weren't chronic health diseases. It means that the government was not the one paying for those things.
Does that include like disability and things like that, like Medicaid?
No. Yes.
Would it now include those?
Oh, yes. Now it would. Yes. Okay. Now it spends $1.7 trillion. So of the $1.9 trillion that the U.S. government spends on healthcare, 1.7 of that is chronic conditions. So these are long-term diabetes treatment or disability, things like that. Currently, in 2024, the the government spent $1.9 trillion on healthcare. It was 27% of the national budget, and that's also the single largest category of government spending. So this is including Medicare, Medicaid, all of that. So almost a third, well, just over a quarter of our entire budget is spent on healthcare right now.
It costs less to equip the world's greatest military, the largest, the biggest, the best trained. It costs less to do that than to manage the health problems of Americans at just a government level.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Nate, let's go one more. Sorry, I want to mention one other thing before we get there. I did a little bit of additional research this morning. Right now, the United States accounts for approximately 40 to 50% of global pharmaceutical profits.
Wow.
So of all the money that the pharmaceutical companies are making, they're making 40 to 50% of their money with U.S. markets.
Wow.
Part of that is the lobbying that we allow in the United States. Go ahead.
We're spending so much more than all the other nations in the world on pharmaceutical products, but did you look into it all in terms of like, I know you can see nations, average IQ, you can also see their average lifespan. It'd be one thing if we're spending more than all these other nations, but on average, Americans are living 20 years longer than everybody.
No, we're not at all. We did look that up in one of our previous episodes that we did about health. We did have the breakdown. I think we're maybe around 11th or 12th in the world, but it's been dropping steeply. It used to be the highest. Well, I don't think it was ever the highest. You've got like the Norwegians and the
Denmark.
Yeah. But it's been dropping quite a bit. It's been dropping quite a bit. Yeah.
I think Japan's also
very high.
Yep.
Yep. I think Greece.
I'm about to pull up the ranked list.
Right.
Okay.
When you get it, interrupt me. But part of the problem is our marketing or our lobbying that we allow. So we allow pharmaceutical companies to lobby politicians directly. It's not just that we allow them to write letters. We allow them to run their own PACs and super PACs. We allow them to serve as not just advisory roles, but to actually co-write legislation, which means they're writing legislation and finding a politician who will put it into Congress, right? We think that your congressman's writing the legislation. No, a lot of legislation is being written by lobbyists. And so this is different than what a lot of other countries do. A lot of other countries either don't allow pharmaceutical companies to lobby the government, or it's heavily restricted. It's only advisory. They can have no role in writing legislation, and they can't operate what we would call, they wouldn't necessarily call them, but what we would call PACs and super PACs to put that kind of pressure on politicians. And so it's no wonder that most of the medical legislation that comes through Congress makes it harder to get generic drugs, makes it faster for pharmaceutical companies to get their products through and approved, and basically makes it so that the U.S. is this huge cash cow for pharmaceutical companies. So that is very different than a lot of other countries. The medical advertising on TV is very different in the U.S. as well. Most other countries do not permit this at all.
I literally worked in this industry for about 2 years. So that field that navigates the transition from making the product and it being approved actually on the market is called health economics outcomes research. What the U.S. does different than a lot of these other countries. And when I was younger, I think I would have celebrated it, but now I would say my view is definitely more complex. A lot of other countries have what are called HTA agencies. So there's a health technology assessment agencies, and they go through and they're centralized, and they actually say, this is the amount we're paying for the drug. We've gone through the safety, we've gone through its efficacy, we've gone through its use. We've looked at how many people in our country actually have this disease. So, I mean, there's some countries where like, guys, we're so small, we're literally talking about 5 people.
Right.
Sometimes they'll pay whatever price. But the U.S. doesn't have that kind of centralized. It kind of goes down to the state and then privatized at the insurer level. And this is one of the advantages of, I think, of places like Norway that are obviously smaller. Being centralized, the government can then say, I know you want to sell your drug for $80,000 per dose here, but we've looked at it. It's not that effective. It's not that healthy. We're going to pay you a max of this. Now, anyone who needs it, certainly they can travel out of the country. But that's literally one of the big reasons we just don't have a centralized HTA, health technology assessment process, whereas almost every country from Canada, from Northern Europe, from even some of these developing nations in the East, they have something like that. And they rigorously look at it. They're central. And they say, we're not paying that much, or here's the max amount that we'll pay.
I would imagine that to get something like that put in place, it would require an act of Congress.
Absolutely.
That is heavily controlled by the pharmaceutical lobby, so chances of something like that happening.
That have a lot of money because we've let them operate how they've operated.
Yeah.
Right.
I want to show one other thing before we go to our first break, and I'm not going to read through all of this, but Nathan, if you have the timeline So this is just kind of a timeline. You could freeze frame this or pause it if you wanted to get an idea of just basically with nutrition, how the process has gone. And some of the big ones are the U.S. government starting to introduce dietary guidelines and lunch program guidelines. But a lot of those were heavily in the don't eat the saturated fats, eat the seed oils, eat the grains, things like that. Wes, I remember from you, I heard that McDonald's up until the 90s used to fry all of its French fries in beef tallow, right?
Yeah.
It was a huge campaign. Phil Sokoloff had a huge campaign against, they're called tropical oils, so like your palm oil and your coconut oil, which are really good for you. And he also advocated for skim milk. And he's also Jewish.
Right.
I'm not even kidding you. The guy who got tallow out of McDonald's for frying is
there we go.
He's Jewish.
Which, is crazy because David, the Psalms are full of like, you are better to me than marrow and fatness. And, you would think that, anyway.
Right.
But it's
the cream
cheaper,
of
right?
milk.
Yeah.
Is it cheaper?
It's cheaper.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yep. Okay, let's hit our first commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to start to dive into, what this would mean for families and what can be done on a practical level.
What if your family's financial strategy was built on more than just numbers? What if it was built on scripture? At Private Family Banking, we believe managing wealth is more than just good planning. It's a God-given privilege and responsibility. In Genesis and Deuteronomy, and all the way into the New Testament, God calls us to be fruitful, wise, and faithful with what He provides. We help Christian individuals, families, and small businesses grow, protect, and pass on wealth anchored in timeless biblical principles to the glory of God in the advancement of His kingdom. Schedule your free discovery call today at liberationeconomy.com.
America is a country that was founded for the purpose of allowing Christians to do their duty before God and not to have their consciences ruled by the doctrines and commandments of men. Reese Fund exists in order to see the 10 Commandments properly applied, not just as a plaque on the wall, but to actually be used in business as though they're commandments from God that we're supposed to obey. Our goal is to find businesses and to buy them and to build them up. We want to find manufacturing businesses and use them to make sure that we can maintain our capacity to do things here. Reese Fund, Christian capital, boldly deployed.
Are you a Christian struggling to find companies that align with your values and beliefs? Well, then Squirrely Joe's has you covered for all your coffee needs. All of their coffee is hand-selected and roasted fresh every day by a family of fellow believers. Try them out and you'll savor exceptional coffee while knowing that your investment supports a company committed to following God's teachings and upholding truth and righteousness, ensuring that your hard-earned money contributes to the growth of God's kingdom. Stop giving your hard-earned dollars to pagans who support evil. Right Response listeners have access to an exclusive deal. Your first bag of coffee is free. All you have to do is cover the shipping. So head on over to squirrelyjoes.com/right response. Again, that's squirrelyjoes.com/right response to claim your first free bag of coffee today.
All right, welcome back. We are picking up the conversation here where we left off. And just to summarize that, we're extremely sick. It's not just that we are unhealthy, right? There's kind of an unhealthy where you just are you sit around on the couch all day and things like that. We are sick as a nation. We are actually sick. We have chronic diseases. We have diseases that we don't know about. We have diseases that are being called, good. And what's worse is most of the people who recognize that they are sick and are unhealthy, if you're fat, what do you do now? You take an injection to curb your appetite or to get rid of your weight problem.
What's that? Pill or injection?
Ozempic was the one that's ruining people's eyes, but now there's an injection one that I forget. It's all the rage right now. And if you do go to a doctor, and I thought it was interesting that one of the recommendations was ask your doctor about root causes, not just about your symptoms. Like my wife has been in the medical field for a long time, and it just drives her crazy that all doctors, primarily most doctors are interested in just treating a symptom.
Right.
And when you talk about, well, what's the root cause on my body level that's causing this? It's like, I don't know, you just have high blood pressure, take this pill.
Yeah.
Well, why do I have high blood pressure? Well, walk 10,000 steps a day. Okay. So we are sick as a nation, which is bad enough, but also we are doing very little to treat the root causes of our sicknesses.
Right. Well, I would imagine that's probably not a good business plan.
Nope, not a good business plan.
Right? Like if you actually get to root causes and you actually fix the problem instead of simply, because if you're addressing the symptoms, then you're able to sell a product indefinitely to the same, to the same market again and again and again. You have a lifelong customer.
Yes. I should have run these numbers, but it'd be really fascinating to know the increase in size, like per capita, of the healthcare industry over the decades of the U.S. I mean, it used to be a town would have a doctor, and he would go there with his little bag,
Right.
and that was your healthcare system.
Right.
We've said it before, but the love of money is the root, not of all evil, but of all kinds
Types
of evil.
of evil.
Yeah.
All types of evil.
all
stem out of it.
varieties, including, well, we'll give you a pill because that gives us more kickback. We'll get your child vaccinated because that gives us more kickback. We're going to grow this. We're going to do so many things. And what is it for? So people will be healthier, thrive. Nope. So we make more money.
And it's related to the love of money, but in a different way. Rushdoony said that one of the big changes that happened was that doctors started being sued. And so the idea of the single doctor in the village was no longer an option because he couldn't defend himself from lawsuits. And so large hospital organizations had to form, and they had to have huge legal teams, and they had to have teams that reviewed processes so they could say, hey, we followed this process. And then the government had to release protocols, and the hospitals had to ensure they were in line. And all of that, a lot of that was so that they wouldn't get sued into non-existence anymore. And so a lot of the healthcare industry is simply compliance and what can we do to make sure we don't get sued? What can we do to make as much money as we can? And what can we make sure we don't lose that money by being sued?
As much as possible in, as little as possible going out.
Yes.
I swear, when they're bidding for like sheets or bedspread at the hospital, they're like, we want the most threadbare. I need you to find the ugliest possible pattern that you can.
Yeah.
Oh, it looks good. It's warm. Out. We need nasty threadbare sheets to save money. I don't know if that's really why, but it seems like that
the sheets are like plastic.
Yeah. Well, it might have something to do with what they have to clean off of it too.
Yeah, that's probably true.
But, okay, so here are some. I'm going to go through just 4 recommendations. Wes, feel free to interrupt, and then I want to go back and go through them.
Just for the record, real quick, one of these days we're going to have to do an episode on capitalism, because I think, like as you were talking about, private individual doctors being sued, and so then teaming up with conglomerations, and all these kinds of things because they want to make money, keep money, and defend against being sued for money. There are, and it's not to say that like that. Okay, so this other system is therefore the answer. There are massive problems, with multiple systems of money, and systems, economic systems, but. I do think that we're like, well, I'm American, America, baby, and we think that capitalism can't have any problems at all, and that's something that like I don't think I ever had to think about until I was older, and not just because of age and maybe maturing, but older in the sense of just the world and its innovation and the ways that things have developed. Like I think of the 2020 election. What do you do? When, like a handful of individuals, you could write their names down on a napkin, actually collectively, they control every single platform for free speech. Right. And so if they decide together that the Hunter Biden laptop story is just not going to be available, then poof, it disappears. And there are many people who said that actually would have swayed their vote. Perhaps it could have swayed an entire election, and then all the consequences over the next 4 years and how that affected, people thrown in prison for praying outside of abortion clinics, or 13, U.S. service members dying in Afghanistan and the disaster that turned out to be. So there's all these consequences that happen, as the implications for elections, and then elections themselves can be virtually determined, if not outright dictated by the suppression of certain stories. And And it'd be one thing if, the public square was, like there was a time where it's flesh and blood. The public square is like literally going into the town square and raising your voice and sitting at this meeting, and it's available to anyone. But like, it's like, well, build, and this is the rhetoric that people will, conservatives should build their own platform, whatever. And then some guys do, and then it gets shut down. They're like, well, build your own servers.
Right.
And then some guys do, and they get raided by FBI,
Right.
and like,
Right.
so what do you do when the means of speech for your voice to actually be heard is not just controlled, but first and foremost from an economic standpoint, monopolized?
Right.
Like, what do you do when there's a monopoly on the very platform for free speech? And I think what we've seen is that the government has to step in. And I know that offends our American sensibilities, but I think there are certain things that the founders, as much as I appreciate them, and I appreciate them as much as the next guy, there's so many things that we need to return to the founders that they had right and we've gotten wrong. But then there's a few things, it's not even that they got it wrong so much as they just probably couldn't conceive. Like it's just impossible to conceive that 250 years later that there's going to be the internet, and then artificial intelligence,
Right.
And social media and Twitter, and like, I mean, how do you predict some of these things? I don't think you do. And so that's why, like, we've done episodes, in a general sense, not specifically on economics, but in a general sense related to the state. And we've made the argument that seems counterintuitive for most, conservatives, but we've made the argument that, yes, we believe the state should be smaller in some regards, but there's other ways in which the state should probably be larger. I remember arguing with my brother. One of my brothers was, like a self-described Marxist. But don't worry, if that concerns you, he now would describe himself as a communist.
Oh, he's moving in the right direction.
So he's a communist, and he would probably say his older brother is a fascist, which means that we are arch enemies. I love him and care about him. He's my brother.
I've met him. He's a good dude.
He's a good dude. He is. But he's terribly, terribly wrong, with some things. And so much of it is just shaped by your life. Like he has his PhD, and spent most of his life in school. And so he thinks like, man, if we had universal income, then everybody would be, turn out to be a Mozart, and like, cause he's like everyone.
That's what welfare's done for the black
exactly.
community.
Well, see, that's the thing is everyone he's surrounded by, he's like, it's not fair that we're having to work our butts off, at a restaurant or whatever and, like we're clocking in like 80, 90 hour weeks, to get our education and do all these free internships while also paying the bills. And in his mind, he's thinking like, if we didn't have to worry about this, then we would be solving, mathematical problems and getting us to Mars and here's the deal. Him and some of his friends probably would.
Yeah.
The problem is would. I would like for him just, like before you make that deliberation, why don't you spend like, 10 years in Atlanta?
Did you see that thing?
And then, start to think about that.
It was in a city in Los Angeles, I think, where this guy had proposed these mobile tiny homes that could be parked in the parallel parking spots of the big cities. Did you see this? It was on the news.
I heard about
I didn't see it.
And so they go in there and they're showing it.
Oh, yeah, I did.
And the guy pulls down the desk.
And it's just a meth lab or something.
No. It's clean. It's a prototype.
Oh,
it's a prototype.
I see.
So they're saying how great this would be, and it's this tiny little camper. You can't stand up in it. You just sit in it, but it takes up one parallel parking spot, and it's to be home housing for the homeless people.
The homeless, yeah.
And he pulls down the desk that falls out of the wall. He goes, and here the formerly homeless can sit and they can do their art. And I'm like, they can what? They can sit and do their art?
I think Michael Knowles actually addressed this. No. Yeah, I think it was Matt Walsh. But he said that I think he said they implemented it.
Oh, really?
And they start,
Well, yeah.
And basically, like what they had was, because they didn't have bathrooms, I think, in it, and so but there was like a public restroom that they established that everyone could use, and everybody was defecating on the street, in the and they asked them like why, like it's literally like 50 feet, like if you could just, and they literally did not have the degree of ambition necessary to travel the extra 50 feet. And basically just saying that it's a state of mind. It's not, these are people who are down on their luck. Like it's America. We're talking about America. Like nobody is poor in America unless you choose to be.
Yep.
Being homeless is a choice in most cases. There may be some exceptions, but they are few and far between. So it's poverty by choice because of abdicating responsibility, or it's rare exceptions of, you get hit by a truck, or it's exceptions like the government ruins your life, and you get FBI or swatted or something like that, and they take away
Or I have some sympathies for veterans with PTSD, things like that.
Yes, that's true.
Yep.
But anyways, the point, like going back to my main point, was just to say, so arguing with my Marxist brother, I remember one of the examples that he used to give is, he said, like, if it's just a matter of, like, so many things, it's you think it's well, this person worked harder than all the rest, but there is something to be said for time. And he said, like how is it your fault if you're born in 2025 and somebody else happens to be born in the 1700s and they settle a particular spot of land, and in this land, because I was arguing about property taxes, which I do think property taxes are theft. But he was saying, if we don't have property taxes, then we would immediately return to a feudal lord system within one generation. And I asked him, to flesh it out, because I don't get mad at opponents, especially if I happen to be related to them, and I'm willing to hear them out. And he said, so what if somebody owns land and you own land and you bought that land for a certain price because it's on a river? It has water access, but they own the land that's upstream of the river, and they decide to dam the river. And create, a pond and a lake and this and that, or to steer it to another portion of land,
pollute it,
or pollute it. And so now you spent X amount of dollars because there's a river on your land, and now there's not. And it's like, well, it's private property, and there's no property taxes. So it's like, I always think of Chris Farley. This is just my stupid mind and the way that it works. But Chris Farley and David Spade, I think it was Black Sheep, where they're in a cabin in the woods and they're playing checkers together. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this.
I didn't see that.
And David Spade is he takes his last checker and he's like, there it is. He's like, I just won 7 games in a row. He's like, I've never won so many games in a row. And Chris Farley is pretty upset. And he's like, well, yeah, well, it's kind of easy to win if you never move your back row. And I was thinking about that. It's like, what property taxes do in one sense, and don't get me wrong, I have my problems with property taxes, but in one sense, it forces people to move their back row.
Right.
It forces you to move your back row. Like what would happen if you never have to move your back row? Right? You just sit on it, and not just like for 20 years, but I'm talking about generations. I'm talking about 200 years. Like at a certain point, because land is finite, it's all owned. Nobody could ever own a plot of land ever again. Like it's all owned, and somebody has land that is upstream at a river's head, and everybody else. He could literally just rule the world. Like, you want water? Like a Mad Max kind of situation. Like you want water? You want to live? Okay, you have to start paying me these royalties, and you have to pay me this, and you have to pay. And so my point is, going back to free speech and, Facebook and Meta, and all these things. My point is, I don't think that we have fully conceived of what is going to happen when robots can do most forms of menial labor. When FSD, we're really close, so go even closer than robots, but self-driving trucks, so much of the population, that's a huge vocation of driving trucks. I have friends who drive trucks. So what happens when there's FSD and all these companies don't have to pay a truck driver, and we'll have, once it gets good enough, we'll have fewer incidents, accidents and things like that. And they buy this FSD truck and it has to be maintained and things like that. But overall, it's cheaper and there's less accidents, and that entire vocation is gone. And then you think of, back with slaves, it's like, well, who's going to pick the cotton if we, free the slaves? And then, with immigrants, it's like, well, who's going to pick the cotton, if we don't let all these immigrants in here? Well, here's an answer for the timeless, age-old question of who's going to pick the cotton. What about when it's robots? Eventually. And it's not just the cotton, but it's also, maintenance on, it's the car shop, and it's stocking shelves in the grocery store, and it's all these different jobs. So just freedom of speech and the 2020 election is just one tangible example that we've already experienced, but there's a ton coming down the pipeline. And so my point is, For the longest time, I think I just equated a righteous government as a small government. But you can be big in some aspects. I do think there are some things where the Bible actually sets jurisdictions that the government is not supposed to be involved. Okay, so I do think that there are some universal transcendent laws that God sets in His holy word where this does not belong to the government, but rather it belongs to households. But in other areas that aren't specified by Scripture, where the government does have a certain responsibility to promote the good and to punish the evildoer, in those realms, we think just, small. And that small, by default, will be moral. But I think there's a way of being big and righteous, and there's a way of being small and wicked. And I think that one of the things, if the government's job is to punish evildoers, is there a way of doing evil economically in markets?
Right.
Is there a way of doing wickedness in markets? Right? It's not just, the thief who crawls into someone's window, and steals their jewelry in a literal physical sense, but there's all kinds of forms of theft that we're talking about with pharmaceutical companies, and that happens all the time. And if the government punishes the wicked evildoer, and the the eighth commandment, "Thou shalt not steal," is something that corporations can do, then the idea of just this total free market with no restraints, and that the government doesn't have some kind of vested interest to make sure that, because it's one thing if the dude's lazy, but there's another thing to be said, like you and all your descendants will be indefinitely poor.
Right.
And he says, well, why? And it says, well, because you committed the unforgivable crime of being born 200 years too late.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Right.
So anyways, there's a lot that I do think that conservatives are going to have to think deeply about, that we've had the luxury of assuming for a long time.
Well, just to put a kind of a bow on that, one of the things, we did the episode a while back about conservatism and conservatives, and I think that we have a tendency, just as humans, but even as Americans, to think, well, because we had this system, we don't have to worry anymore, right? And even some of us who are like, well, our system is wrong, we need to go to this system or to that system, we kind of fall into the same trap of, well, that system will solve it for us, right?
Right.
There has to be a well-considered system for the time, accompanied with, and Wes, you and I have talked about this a lot, what went wrong? Well, it seems like what went wrong was that belief that the system must be preserved, tweaked, modified, and continually be worked on to be the appropriate governing set of principles for the time. And the Constitution and the Republic and the founders, they became that thing where we as Americans said, because we have that, we don't have to be on guard anymore.
Right.
We've got it. We're good.
Yep.
No problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. People change.
Yeah.
And therefore systems of government, that's not to say that any system of government, could be appropriate. I do think there are some immutable standards. Like I think that communism is actually universally immoral.
Right.
And so you can't say, well, this is a particular time and place where communism can be permissible. Like I mean, you can read just the default, basic definition of communism, and it actually, directly contradicts the principles and commandments of Scripture. But there are other forms of government that I don't believe are inherently wrong. Now, they may not be prudent in various places with various peoples and various times, but there is an argument for moral permissibility. And we've said it several times, but I'll say it again. I think a constitutional representative, republic, for me, is an ideal form of government. But I think it's a form of government that people have to aspire to. Mm-hmm. And we think that it just fell out of the sky. Like for the first time, we found the, inherently righteous form of government.
Right.
And that before we were just ignorant. And what we neglect to realize is that, that this republic was only suitable for a religious and upright, morally upright people, and is wholly fit for no other. But then that begs the question: where did we acquire this kind of moral and religious people? And the answer to that is from about 700 years of a Christian monarchy that had a heavy hand in most cases. And so I think that one, limitless immigration; two, universal suffrage, which was not a part of our founding. The idea that anyone can come to America and almost immediately, very quickly, vote in America.
Right.
And so, universal immigration and universal suffrage, and then that combined with, but we must keep the same form of government. So we're going to radically change the fabric of the nation, but insist upon the same means of managing this population while we systematically change it rapidly in just half a century to where it's an entirely different people. Yep. That to me seems like a recipe for disaster. And now that we've gotten ourselves into this situation, we want to be Christian about it. We want to be humane. We want to be merciful, but we also want to be righteous and courageous. And I think one of the things that's going to have to be considered is how do you govern, right? Because used to, it's like small government made sense because it was self-government. But you have to have the kind of people that are capable of self-government. How do you now govern virtually a new nation as far as the people are concerned? It's a new stock of people, many of which have for generations have never been self-governing.
Right.
How do you do that? Probably not with small government.
Well, and the classical conservative is going to say the small government, big government is the wrong framing. It's limited government.
Yes.
Right. And so it's exactly what you're saying. The government should be very strong in certain areas, but it should be limited to certain
areas. And I do believe that that is a universal biblical principle, like a transcendent principle. I think all human governments must be limited.
But you're right. It's become
But the question is where, how, like those kinds of things.
Yeah. All right, let's hit our last break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some real practical things for health changes and trying to be more healthy as a family.
Running your business with purpose means looking beyond last month's numbers to next year's vision. Kaylee Smith offers CFO-level strategy scaled just for small businesses. At Midstate Accounting, she takes care of your compliance, bookkeeping, and tax returns while providing holistic advisory and fractional CFO services to help you steward your resources with a distinctly Christian perspective. Ready to align your finances with your future? Then call Kaylee Smith at 573-889-7278 for a free, no-obligation consultation. Mention the Right Response podcast to get 10% off your first 3 months. Prefer to explore online? Then you can visit midstateaccounting.net to learn more or schedule a call. Again, that's midstateaccounting.net. With Midstate Accounting, you'll plan for tomorrow while operating in faith today. So call Kaylee Smith at 573-889-7278. Again, that's 573-889-7278. The British statesman Edmund Burke once noted, and I quote, "When ancient opinions and rules of life are taken away, the loss cannot possibly be estimated." Close quote. It seems that we live in such times where ancient opinions and rules of life have indeed been taken away. We are not estimating the loss, but experiencing this loss in real time. Speaking of such times as ours, the reactionary thinker Nicolas Gomez de Villa said that modern man is scandalized by what was commonplace in traditional society. The most radical book of our time, he said, would be a compendium of old proverbs. A compendium of old proverbs, truths, and wisdom that were once commonplace in traditional society is just what is needed right now. Who is My Neighbor is precisely this book, an encyclopedia of ancient opinions, rules of life, truths, all once forgotten, but now recovered. So go and get Who is My Neighbor from Western Front Books by going to westernfrontbooks.com. Again, that's westernfrontbooks.com. At Kingsman Caps, we believe that every man is called to carry the crown. That is, to seek out and gain glory, and ultimately to give that glory to Christ. Our hats aren't just apparel, they're a symbol of sacred duty. We're forming a coalition of men who walk with conviction, courage, and humility. knowing the honor we bear is not ours to claim, but ours to carry. Through Kingsman Caps, we are starting a brotherhood of men who live to honor Christ as King, and who will one day lay their crowns at his feet. Every Kingsman cap is crafted with premium materials, rugged construction, and timeless designs made to endure the burdens and battles of life. We've just released our newest colorway, the Illumination, an all-white country fit featuring a bold 5-panel design and a clean white-on-white logo. It's built for those who walk in the light. Join the brotherhood and carry the crown. And if you're building God's kingdom through your own business, brand, or venture, we now offer custom hat orders with an easy process and a 100 hat minimum per style and color. Step 1. Go to kingsmancaps.com to contact us with your custom hat inquiry. Step 2. Send us your logo and brand colors. Step 3. Choose your hat style and details. Step 4. We'll take care of the rest. Carry the crown because Christ is King. Go to kingsmancaps.com to get yours today and join the brotherhood.
All right, welcome back.
All right.
So, let's talk about, based on RFK's and the HHS's findings, a couple of suggestions that families can do to try and take ownership of their health. And one of the things that I thought was funny was that one of the criticisms of RFK's release or his findings, the HHS's findings, were it puts too high of a priority on individual responsibility. And it's not accounting for all the systemic things. Well, there are systemic things, but they're not the ones that you're thinking of. So here are some of the things that came out of the findings. Number 1, eliminate or greatly reduce ultra-processed foods. Number 2, detox the home environment. Number 3, evaluate medical and supplement use. Just as a disclaimer, we're not doctors. We're not telling what to do. But in my opinion, if you can find a trustworthy doctor who looks at whole systems and can get off some of your prescription medications through other things like diet and just making your body more healthy. I'm not opposed to taking antibiotics if you've got a raging infection, but some of these things we should not be on perpetually, that sort of thing.
And targeted, like an ointment or even drops for antibiotics is much better than a systemic antibiotic.
Yep. Garlic drops in the ears can often prevent an ear infection.
Right.
And then, if it really does become real serious, okay, then go get it. But
don't
not
die.
Every time your kid has an earache, just immediately start popping the antibiotics. So
it's something crazy, like 10 years to fully regrow, like they've called the gut, the in many ways the second brain, because it's a very complex interaction between a number of different bacteria.
Yep.
And when you take the antibiotic and wipe that out, it can take up to 10 years for that to get back to the status that it is. That affects digestion, that affects hormones. Like, it's not something that's just like, oh, a week later, took an antibiotic, everything regrew perfectly.
I took
it takes
probiotics for a week.
Years to cultivate that.
Yep. And then exercise. Okay, so let's talk about the food for a minute. This is the one that RFK highlighted as the greatest net negative, is the ultra processed food. And so we talked about the chemicals and the ingredients and things like that. So Wes, let's just give some advice here on food, because I know as soon as we say food, 2 things come up. Number 1 is it's more convenient to prepare pre-cooked or pre-packaged meals. Right. Busy life, even if the mom is home, families might have their kids in 4 sports and they're going this way and that way, and it's hard to find the time to cook a home cooked meal. So that's a practical thing, is the time. And then the second thing is the cost. Well, it's way cheaper to just buy what the store is selling me and not to go to the back where the organic section is. And then I look at the prices of the organic and that's so expensive.
Yeah, cost is a big one.
Cost is a big one. Well, so we want to be realistic, right? We want to be aware that people actually have budgets. So Nate, let's show the pictures of the fruits and vegetables. Let's do the Dirty Dozen first. So this is one that you can pause and come back to if you've never seen this before. These are the items of produce that are the most heavily contaminated with pesticides and fertilizers and things like that. So if you have a very limited budget and you want to start making some changes, either don't buy these or buy these ones in organic. And those are strawberries, spinach, kale and collard greens, grapes, which we all give our kids grapes, right? It's one of kids' favorite treats. It's an easy one to give them. Peaches, pears, nectarines, apples, bell peppers, cherries, blueberries, and green beans.
It's funny. I recently was reading something on spinach, which is not something I normally do, but we have a tortoise. And our tortoise, every time, we switch it up. Sometimes it's lettuce, sometimes it's kale, sometimes it's spinach. And the tortoise just is not wanting to eat spinach. And I was curious about it. And so this doesn't surprise me that it might be higher on the pesticides. But in addition to that, from what I was looking at spinach, even for humans, even if there's not pesticide, it seems as though a lot of things when you cook it, it's better raw, and and when you cook it, you're actually lessening its nutrients. But spinach is kind of the reverse.
Opposite. The dark leafy greens should be cooked.
Yeah, from what I've looked into, raw spinach is not good for you.
No, it's not.
Even if there weren't pesticides, it's not something that people
I'm holding my tongue.
should eat. What do you
kale
think?
and spinach.
What do you know?
That my research agrees exactly with that. And
holding your tongue, just saying you don't.
And they don't
eat,
add
period.
substance to the meal. Basil, spinach, obviously it depends on the meal, but come on, which one adds more flavor? Which one is better for you? We all know.
Right.
Kale is huge. There's people making chips out of it.
Yeah.
Everything. It was a decoration in Pizza Hut in the 90s. That was the category for it. This is decoration.
Yeah.
Michael, that source you got it from, by the way, ewg.org. Super helpful. They have an app. They have tons of stuff on food, on sunscreen, on care products. ewg.org, especially if you're a wife and you're listening to this. That is your one-stop shop for a lot of these healthy living things.
Yep. Let's go to the next graph, Nate. Not graph, image. So these are the clean 15. So again, you're trying to save money. These are the fruits and vegetables that, even if they're farmed conventionally, are going to be the least contaminated with the pesticides and things like that. So
Super
avocados.
happy to see avocados on there.
Yep.
I love avocado.
I do too. But you'll notice a lot of these are fruits and vegetables that have some sort of shell around them. Not all of them.
That makes sense.
So you're getting past the shell. But avocado, sweet corn, pineapples, onions, papayas, frozen sweet peas, asparagus, honeydew melon, kiwis, cabbage, watermelon. Again, the rind, mushroom, mangoes, and sweet potatoes. And by the way, sweet potatoes are way better for you than potatoes. I love a good French fry and a good
rare potato L.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do not like sweet potatoes.
Well, I'm not saying you have to like them. I happen to like them.
No, you're correct. They're better for you.
Yeah.
But they're not better tasting.
Yeah. So that's a practical thing. So if you're making some budget choices, let's go to the next.
Women love sweet potatoes, though. I've noticed.
My wife loves sweet potatoes.
Yeah, my wife. She's she wants to do a steak frites or something like that. It's one of her favorite meals, and she wants the bed with all these different dishes. The bed is going to be sweet potatoes that are cut into almost like steak fries.
Frites fries.
Yeah, and
I like sweet potatoes.
I appreciate it, and she wants to keep me alive. But I'm.
Do you like sweet potatoes, or do you like crunchy foods tossed in salt?
I like
is the
baked
sweet
sweet
potato
potatoes.
really load bearing here?
I like baked sweet potatoes with butter on it.
Again, you're covering it in salt and fat and butter, and I love sweet potatoes. My brother in Christ, you love salty butter.
Fair enough. That might be the case.
Which I do too, for the record.
Butter can be really good for you.
Yeah.
Butter's great.
Yeah.
If it's
My
actually
kids,
butter.
I'll give them just straight butter. It's the grass fed, the whole stuff, salted.
Yep.
Super good for you.
Yeah.
Yep. Nate, let's talk about some of the costs of if you wanted to switch and start buying organic foods. So this is some averages, and if you're wanting to switch to organic, you can pause it here. I'm not going to take the time because we're running a little low on time, but in short, it can cost you, this was average family of 4 numbers in the U.S. That's kind of what metrics are measured in, which is another commentary about our society. But anyway.
Is this for a month?
Yes, this is for a month. So it's going to cost, on average, between maybe $300 to $500 more for your food and grocery budget if you switched exclusively to organic in every place that you can. So you're getting rid of the seed oils and you're using tallow or avocado oil or something like that. You're getting rid of the packaged goods. This is not getting into meat. Organic meat is another thing that we can talk about another time. Yep. But it's not, so on average, a grocery bill for a family of 4, this is just for food, is $900 to $1,500. That's the frugal to the more liberal. Okay, so somewhere
Our
in
food
there.
budget for 4 falls literally about right in the middle of that range, a little bit on the low end.
So if that's about if you're spending $1,000 a month and you switch to organic, expect to bump it up $300 to $500 a month, possibly. Okay. That's why I gave the pictures. If you have to ease into it, prioritize those ones that are on the dirty dozen. Don't buy those as conventionally farmed, or avoid buying them at all.
I should say too, we do eat a lot of organic, and our budget is that. And some of the ways you do it is Costco, so buying in bulk.
Yep.
And also Thrive Market is like an online market where you can order things in bulk as well that are super healthy.
Azure Standard is another one.
Azure Standard is another good one. So my wife kind of picks and pulls from those to come together and get tons of good ingredients. And it's not like we buy every single ingredient organic, but like you said, the ones that matter.
Right.
Can I buy it in bulk so it's cheaper? Can I order it online and get everything I need for 3 months? That's how our budget is. I think around $1,200 or so. Varies a little bit. But eating all the healthy oils, tons of beef, lots of chicken, meat at every meal, etc.
Yeah. Let's briefly talk about water, because water is super important too. And it's sad to me that our water is so unhealthy, because I remember, growing up in a third world country, I just thought it's incredible that in the U.S. you can just turn on the tap and drink the water.
You thought.
Well, what we were getting in Venezuela was the bacterias that are going to give you, all
Dysentery.
sorts of dysentery and all of that stuff. And so you don't get that here. That's true. But you are getting the microplastics, the pharmaceutical products, whether it's the birth control or things just being washed through. You're getting a lot of heavy metals depending on where you live. And so even the tap drinking water now, and fluoride, if your city or county fluoridates the water. So I did a little bit of research on alternatives that you can do to have better water. So Nate, let's show this real quick. Again, this is something you can come back to and pause it and look at. Bottled water is an option. It's going to not have the contaminants in it, but you are going to get a lot of microplastics from the bottled water. So not probably the best option for if you're looking for long-term health. But there's pitcher filters, there's faucet-mounted filters, all the options there, and then the average cost both to buy that thing on the front end and then to maintain it if you have to change filters over the year, things like that. And then it lists what those remove. Does it remove microplastics? Does it remove fluoride? Does it remove heavy metals, etc.? So lots of options there. We use the countertop one at the bottom because we do not own our own home. And that works really great. It for our drinking water, it's not their shower water and things like that, but we use that for all our cooking and drinking. And it wasn't too much on the front end. We change the filters twice a year, and it really filters out, as far as the drinking water goes, like all of the contaminants that you could want to. So, yeah.
I was just going to say,
We do reverse osmosis.
Yep. You can think house level filtration.
Yep.
I've known a number of people that they actually had acne. And so the water you shower with could be hard water, could have different minerals in it. That's not great for your hair, not great for your skin. So don't just be thinking drinking at your sink, but also think for the whole house. So we have a whole house water filter. And like you said, a reverse osmosis. Oftentimes you put that under your sink. So specifically what you're drinking, and sometimes it'll strip everything out of there. And so you want to add remineralization back in.
That's right.
So don't just think like, okay, how does my water get good? Oh, I just do a Brita or a filter. But no, like at my whole house, all the water we're intaking, then underneath my sink. And then how am I adding in some of the stuff that's accidentally stripped away?
Yeah. Good.
Steps at a time, though. That does not need all to be done this weekend.
That's the thing is, yes, the situation in our nation is dire and things need to be done. But on a personal level, like it's so easy to jump in with both feet and then realize you don't know how to swim, right? And so if this is something you're serious about, talk to your wife, or if you're listening, you talk to your husband, and make practical steps that can be sustainable over time. It's better to take a couple small steps that you stick to rather than take one giant step and then fall backwards, and that's the end of that story.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Great episode.
Okay.
Thanks, Michael. I think it's an important topic, and I think you gave us a lot of practical application that people will be blessed by. Thanks for tuning in, and Lord willing, we'll see you next time.